Excellent. Okay. Welcome, Jayce. I am so excited to have you on the podcast this week. I have been excited to talk to you ever since we had that prior conversation about like what is solo poly and also all about how you help people make stems at home, stem tools at home. And so I can't wait to get into that and like so many other things. But first, could you start by giving us like tell us who you are, if you don't mind?
Okay. So first off, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I really love your podcast and also loved when we connected and just, we're able to go off. So I'm really excited to be here and to talk about things we have planned to talk about today. I am a therapist and a spiritual counselor. I'm traditionally trained in mental health counseling and art therapy, and I also am in training as a Hebrew priestess. And I come to the work from a view of centering lived experience, both in client and in therapist, and using that as a tool within therapy, not something we avoid. And do a lot of mind, body, sensory engagement, playing with the flow type of work within counseling.
Awesome, awesome. That sounds good. Well, thank you for sharing and jumping right into it. You had said when we first decided to do this podcast episode that you don't believe that traditional talk therapy works as well for neurodivergence. And so I wanted to get your take on that. Why do you think that is?
So there's a lot of reasons, and it can work for some, absolutely. There is a higher likelihood of talk therapy alone not working as well, especially for those who are autistic, ADHD, or have complex PTSD, because there tends to be, and again, not all, but for those who have a higher self-awareness. We tend to talk to ourselves a lot. We tend to have that curiosity and navigate a lot about ourselves already. And that's a lot of what talk therapy does is going through, navigating, getting it out to be able to find what's going on. And we need to be able to do more than just identify it because we're already kind of identifying it. Where do I go from there? So I find that talk therapy can be helpful, but especially if you also have somatic therapy, some sort of expressive arts therapy, whether art therapy, dance movement therapy, drama therapy, music therapy. There are a lot of amazing tools that aren't talk therapy that can really help with getting that extra step of full engagement,
Mm,
not past the, okay, we know what's going on. Also, the what do we do from here?
I see. So would you recommend a combination of therapies?
I it also really, again, depends on the individual. I personally find I do a combination of therapies with most of my clients. There's probably going to be a bit of talk therapy in most scenarios and most types of therapies added in, just as part of the process. Um, I find for some people, a big part of that talk therapy is necessary because it gets out the communicating of all that self-awareness that you have done
Mhm.
to get it out on the table, to either have some parts reflected back or to be like, this is what's on the table. Where do we go from there?
Absolutely.
I often find it helpful to combine different types of therapy. Uh, we see so many different specialists of doctors for my body for our bodies. I don't see why it is seen as any different for mental health. I have known many people who see multiple therapists. I currently see multiple therapists. I'm in a couples therapist, and then I have my own personal therapist. I think that it's okay to have different healers for different parts of your healing that also that work together. And for many autistic providers, you end up doing more than one thing.
You just a light that was such a light bulb moment for me because you're right. Like we see different specialists for different things. So why not for mental health? I love that.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Also, just a quick plug here for the people who subscribe to the Soft app. That's one of the beauties of the Soft app too, because there's like a whole collection called the Sanctuary that has some internal family systems where you connect with your inner children. There's some dance techniques, there's somatics, there's all kinds of things in there pre-recorded for you to use. Because I agree entirely. It takes a village of practices to raise your inner
Oh,
child.
yeah.
Oh, it takes a village to raise your inner child.
It does. It does. And also, we have come to think about therapy and mental health support as a very individualized thing. That's kind of really a colonizer concept. When we look at more indigenous healing practices, there's a lot more community aspects involved. And so there's also areas of there are some important healing spaces here. I've, sent some of my clients to the Soft app because there's some important resources, but also being able to be in community is a type of healing that we can't do on our own.
I agree. Thank you. That's beautiful that you recommend people. Oh, that gets me to our next
I love
question very nicely. Um,
it.
what do you believe changes when your therapist is also neurodivergent, especially in how they show up for their clients? How is that experience different than if they're not neurodivergent? Or
I love that question. I so I I have quite a few clients who every so often will go, right, this is why I see an autistic therapist. And I don't even totally realize it until they stop and say that. I'm like, oh, right, yeah, because we can skip past the part where you have to explain to me how to, translate from autistic brain into allistic brain, into, able body brain from neurodivergent brain. There's a translate factor that can take a lot of time if your therapist doesn't understand this part of you. It's similar to how, and so our practice, I briefly mentioned, focuses on lived experience centered counseling. And we have a style of practice that we call Phipsian comprehensive counseling. And it speaks to the importance of there is some learning that book learning will never teach you. That lived experience is the only way to know what someone has gone through. And in a similar way of I there was a huge part of myself I couldn't really handle, go talk about and really address in therapy until I found a fellow non-binary therapist. I know that I have clients who, at some point in our work, they, you know what, for this particular thing, I'm Black, I need a Black therapist. I go, all right, let's find you one that works for you. Because there are some things that really, you just need that lived experience aspect to be able to jump to all right, this is what's going on within the context and not having to spend so much time just explaining the context of your life.
Oh my gosh. Whew, that's a big one. And you're so right. I was thinking about that recently with a therapist that I've seen where they know I'm autistic, but I don't know how deep their understanding of autism is. And sometimes I do have to slow down and explain, or I just leave kind of feeling a little invalidated because they'll use like blanket statements like, yeah, anyone can relate to that. And like, yeah.
Yeah. There's an additional huge issue, and there's quite a few pockets of this in our system, but our modern mental health system has not actually caught up with what we know about autism, with what we know about ADHD, with what we know about a lot of neurodivergency. Complex PTSD isn't even properly in the DSM.
Wow, I didn't know that.
there is so much that isn't regularly taught and acknowledged within the system that I personally am afraid to send most autistic clients to anyone who isn't neurodivergent themselves. Um, because there is an additional amount of research, not just from articles, but also from the community, that a lot of therapists don't know to do unless they are in the community themselves.
Keeping it in the fam, if you will. So could you tell me what is one recurring issue that you see in your clients that you're uniquely qualified to help them with?
Hmm.
Because you're neurodivergent, I should say. Or for any reason.
Ah,
For any reason, yeah.
one particular thing about my practice is it's all disabled therapists doing telehealth and really created for all types of mental and physical disabilities um, in our practitioners and for our clients. And with that, I have a background in um, disability justice. I was unable to work in the field for quite a few years because of my physical disabilities. And I, at that time, had to set up, I do an art practice because that's all I could handle physically doing was making art and then just, had to make money. So sell all I can, anything I can make, I got to try to sell it. Um, and I also was doing a lot of disability justice activism at the time. And those perspectives, both having been kicked out of our capitalist world of being able to participate and also being able to see to fight and see those fighting around me for our basic needs has influenced me a lot and I think has helped me be able to have a unique perspective in terms of helping people live chronically ill. A lot of folks come to me to figure out, how do I establish a new normal? Because the normal I always thought I was supposed to be able to have is not a reality for me and is never going to be a reality for me. So, how do I create a reality where I can be healthy, happy, not burn out, survive in this capitalist society? Not always are there answers, but I'm not gonna sit there and say, oh, but you can find some way to make money. Like, no, you might not actually be able to, so there are some aspects of, and I'm not gonna, say, no, you have to do it in the traditional way, but finding how do we find what is natural to us, our natural skills, our natural comforts, and turn those into almost new walls to help us down a path that feels like it's not going to kill us.
Big fan of what you're talking about right now. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it's kind of, I think so many of us have special interests, and maybe some of us miss the fact that there might be ways, because you're right, sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes you don't have the spoons, but there could be interesting ways to potentially monetize those special interests. Um,
Yeah.
and is one of your special interests mental health?
Oh, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Um, the way the mind works, mental health, the way mind and body interact, and particularly like different neurodivergent brain types
Mhm.
are very much like they all fall in the same special interest category for me.
Yeah.
Um, I have a lot of fascination with not just mental health, but that mind-body connection.
Mhm.
We know now that trauma that happens to us is stored in our body, especially if we block it from our mind. And a lot of chronic illness, especially autoimmune disorders, really directly relate to the limbic system and if it is stuck in survival mode in a fight or flight or freeze state. And being able to reset the limbic system and do neural retraining exercises over long periods of time in order to really actually retrain your brain of how to work and retrain that limbic system of we needed to be in survival, but we're not there anymore. That has gotten many autoimmune disorders into remission in ways that doctors have not been able to ever.
It's incredible.
And there's a lot that just like gets dismissed and swept under the rug because it was created by mental health counselors, not by doctors.
Mhm. Wow. Still have a lot to learn.
There's a lot. We could go on for like weeks, months, who knows?
100%. Well, I hate to skip on to something else. Look, it's so funny because I'm like, I made a list and I must stick to the list. How very autistic. But I do have another question.
Yeah.
So I know that one of your special, like your areas that you work on in your practice is polyamory and offering support to polyamorous partners. So
Yeah.
I would,
Sometimes couples come to me who are poly. Um, they can still be a couple that are also have other couples and other relationships. Um, In fact, that's most often how poly folks come to me is as a couple, with one particular partner that they're working through stuff with. And I've got to say, it's not that much different than my monogamous couples counselings. That being said, I often encourage my monogamous couples to explore poly vocabulary, poly communication,
God,
a
yeah.
lot of things around how things are structured in order to create a new healthy communication style, even as a monogamous couple.
There's so I feel like in a healthy polyamorous relationship, the ones I've been in, far more than any monogamous relationship, there's so much more intention, clear communication. Um, God, what's the word I was looking for? I don't know, but the intention is so much more clear. And they say clear is kind. So I love that you promote that. That's really nice. What
I
challenges
love
do poly folks often face that are overlooked in traditional therapy?
it. Poly folks face a lot of the same stuff as monogamous folks. Um, Poly folks still get jealous, it's just making sure you have the conversations, making sure you're honest about it so appropriate supports can be put in place for everyone without being unfair to any individual. Um, what comes to, I would say the main difference is just being okay talking about other people. Sometimes other people are relevant and it's okay to talk about that. And we don't need to like shame, oh, well, this is about you and me. So only you and me can be in the topic of conversation. No, it's okay. Other stuff gets relevant and it's important to be able to talk about all the relevant aspects. Um, there might be some things that come up a little more in terms of things like comfortable and safe practices for intimate relationships with different partners and particular jealousy or um, even just not necessarily health concerns. It can be health concerns, but sometimes just cleanliness concerns. Sometimes it comes up if it's like, like I know I have a different standard than you. So how do I know I can feel safe when you're doing that with not me?
Oh,
Um,
I see.
but again, it's really all just getting things out on the table so that things can be talked out. I find the most common thing in poly and couples counseling, especially with neurodivergent couples, is we have to create a new vocabulary and script and keywords that are specific to that couple. And that can happen with platonic relationships too. There are plenty of times where we have inside jokes with friends that also we use to diffuse a situation or know if someone's tense, we can get that to get them to go, I don't want to laugh, but I can't help it, you know? And allowing for some of that in romantic relationships as well.
Nice. Do you have, if you're comfortable sharing an example of what you mean?
Um, for which thing?
Oh,
I talk a lot.
oh, that's okay. It's okay. It's fine. You're in the right place for that. An example of what it look like to create your own language within your relationship. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
I will not.
so there are so many easy examples. I just need to like, all right, where we go.
Also, I'll take this moment to say, for those who are here in the Zoom, if you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat because at the end, I will ask them, or you can ask them. So feel free to write them or just take notes so you can ask at the end.
So let's say, for example, I'll use myself and one of my partners. Let's say we're both ADHD, so we're good examples. So let's say we have one person who tends to melt down and one person who tends to shut down.
Mm.
And both people experience rejection sensitive dysphoria.
Mm.
And both people experience a certain amount of pathological demand avoidance, which I hate that phrase. We need a different phrase for it, but it is a very real phenomenon. So something might be comfortable for one person to say, like, I can't hear you anymore.
Mm.
And that might make the other feel like my voice isn't important. So we talk through what are some words that have that negative attachment to it for each individual, and what are maybe some words and phrases that don't have that negative attachment, and come to agreement of, okay, if I need space, I can say the words, I need alone zones. And
Oh,
we've agreed that alone zones is something that we just need space, and it isn't about the other person, but about our own need for space. I didn't come up with alone zones. It's from Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
okay. It's cool.
It's a really cute name. I can't take credit for it. But it is one I use a lot with my clients, because it's one that feels like a little, it's a little cutesy, it's a little fun.
Disarming.
It breaks tension. Yeah, exactly. It's a little disarming.
Yeah.
And it allows the focus to be on this neutral, previously agreed upon word instead of anything that is coming from you in that place of emotion.
Mm. Oh my God, I love that. I've not really talked about this on social media, but something that happens to me when I'm in conflict is that it becomes almost impossible for me to make eye contact. And that's been a big issue in past
Mm.
relationships, particularly before I knew I was autistic and people were taking it personally, but it's not personal. Like, I actually don't like eye
Yeah.
contact on a good day. So in conflict, it just feels impossible. So this gives me an idea that maybe I should create just some language around it or something so that people know it's not personal. I in fact would love to never give eye contact if I'm honest. But no.
Yeah, absolutely. And there can be a lot, like, you are so not alone in that.
Yeah.
That's really, especially with autistics, that's really common, especially when you're in that high emotion state. I can't count how many of my clients like need a particular plan for when these high emotions happen. And a lot of the time it's things like if you can handle touch, sitting back to back so you don't have to look at each other, or sitting in the same room but furniture that faces away from each other, or being in different rooms and texting each other. Sometimes there are different levels of distance that we need to allow certain things to be accessible. And there's nothing wrong with that.
It's the first time anybody's ever validated it instead of shaming me. So thank you. That's really big to hear. And those are fantastic ideas. Thank
Hope they help.
you. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm bringing it back to the script. Next question on the list. So I know that you mentioned that you are also an artist. How do you incorporate creativity into your therapy or your own healing journey?
Well, those are two very different questions.
That's true. Well, pick
And
your.
I could go on way too long for both. But as an art therapist, I do love bringing creativity into my sessions. Sometimes with some clients, it is starting the session with a art therapy prompt that kind of gets things moving, that sets the space and the tone, and sets like a space to get out what's going on in your mind that we can then jump off of. I also have some things that I like to help make little kits to send to clients so they can create sensory tools at home. Uh, and some of them also are really art engaging. So this is one that I do. Usually the outsides are blank when I send them. So this is me. This is my painting on it. And then I send two blank front and backs, a bunch of square pages that people can go through, feel, put in whatever order they want. And these are things that I make, like I just gather fabric scraps on the community marketplace when people are giving stuff away. And it can be really helpful to make little things like this that you can just have access to of like, okay, this is mine. I have customized it. I have made it mine. I've personalized it. And the textures within it are ones that bring particular interest and comfort to me. Because those of us who are sensory sensitive also need the most intentional sensory engagement.
Wow. Even looking at that feels good. I want to touch that book. And
It's
I
quite
like,
fun to talk.
yeah, I see the back. Is that a reference to The Nightmare Before Christmas?
No, but I do love that movie, so it's very possible that it unconsciously was. I just
Yeah.
swirls in a lot of stuff. But yeah, like I see it. This one especially
Yeah,
looks very Nightmare Before Christmas. You can see them, in the shadows. They should be right there.
absolutely.
Uh,
One of my faves.
I love it. I love it.
And so I want to talk to you now a little bit about just your own journey in self-employment, because that's one of my special interests is like helping neurodivergent people monetize their special interests. But I think that one of the barriers for people is just kind of seeing to believe that it's possible, and understanding that like if you are to do this, you can do it in your own way. And so I'd love to know like how do you honor your neurodivergence? And I'm sorry, I don't know if this is actually the question that I wrote down, but it's hopefully
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
okay. How did you build your business around your neurodivergent needs? What does it look like for you?
That's a great question. Like many, I was forced to. I mentioned briefly I was working traditionally as a therapist in, you know, a typical system. I was working in a hospital at a rehab facility. Um, and what I now realize was probably autistic burnout came out at the time by flaring up all my chronic illnesses, and that's what I acknowledged and paid attention to. Um, And and that's when I first did neuro retraining on myself, actually. Was when I was healing from that got particularly that was probably the time I was um most disabled, which I hate that phrase, but like um really least able-bodied in my life. And going through that, there was very, very little I was able to do, and I had to find the very few things I could do to stop me from losing my mind. And finding those few things that were accessible, I then had to lean into it. So I had my art business for a while. It was not very successful. I struggled with it a lot. Um, it drained me, burned me out in a different way. And an important thing I realized was I never wanted to sell my art. Art was something I did for me. And when COVID happened, telehealth became a lot more popular. And when telehealth became more popular, all of a sudden people wanted me to practice again. So I found my mentor, who is now my business partner, and they were this amazing, badass, disabled therapist, divesting from licensure, which I can explain that too. That's all another thing. And running this badass, disabled, centered business. And I was like, that's what I need to be. And finding that I could combine not just where I had skill, but also paying attention to where is there an area of work that at least partially refills me while I'm working?
Mm.
Of I am lucky that I'm at a point in my career where I take on the clients I want to take on. And I take on clients that I feel valued working with because I feel like, the right fit goes both ways.
Mm.
When I see that they are, that I am the right therapist for them, it feels good. It feels rejuvenating. It feels like I'm doing something that matters. And that to me keeps me going. And finding the balance of it can't actually be just anything, it has to be the right thing. Um, or else you'll re-burn yourself out again. And realizing there's a lot of different ways to have a business. There's a lot of ways to be freelance, to do sliding scale type payment options. There's a lot of non-traditional business practices that work beautifully, but we don't get told about. And so exploring those
Yeah.
and exploring what avenue feels like this is how I naturally work.
Yep.
Because all of us naturally, we're meant for something. It's this capitalist society that tells us we're not. And that's why they say, oh, there's so many more ADHD and autistic people out there now. No, but more of us are being pushed out of the very, very limited expectations that you are putting out here for us. And that is allowing us to recognize more how our brain works and that we have to accommodate it no matter what you say.
100%. And it's so nice to hear you say that, and funny as well, because my story is so similar, but because I didn't know I was autistic during my last big burnout that led me to self-employment, I always
Mm.
tell it as a hero's journey. Oh, I just couldn't work anymore and I decided it was time to do my own thing. No, I didn't have a choice. I literally couldn't work anymore. Like, so I'm grateful that I like really delved into my special interests and have been living in them now for 11 years. And but it's funny, like, thank you for just sharing this so honestly, because it's so much better, but there are parts of it that still rob me of my soul's essence a little bit too. But it's better than a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I get
Yeah. I mean, that's the capitalism part.
that's true.
Right? We're still stuck in that capitalist society. That is draining. It
Yes.
is.
Ugh. But is there
Yeah.
anything that you had to unlearn in order to be self-employed? And especially
Yeah.
on your own terms?
Yeah. Um, Look, I mean, all of what did employment look like was something I had to unlearn of my idea of what a career is, what a job is. I had to unlearn what is expectations we're taught versus what is actual law,
Hmm.
and really do research into what did grad school tell me I'm supposed to do for the sake of insurance companies, and what does the law actually say?
Wow.
Am I
Dang.
actually allowed to do? There's a difference. I had to unlearn a lot of stuff I learned in grad school
Wow.
because they didn't teach me that much how to be a therapist and do the actual work. They taught us more how to, and as a mental health counseling program, you're supposed to learn more of the actual work than social workers, like the actual, how to do therapy. But no, not really. You learn how to exist in the system.
Wow.
That's really what they're teaching you. And so I had to unlearn all the expectations that were really about the system, not about the actual mental health work. And I had to unlearn a lot of things they taught us that were meant to distance us from our client, but isn't necessarily healthy for our client or us. I had to unlearn that I'm not allowed to be human as a therapist. And that actually, no, I should be human. I should be humanized. It's important to model being human and giving that self allowance. So yes, a lot. There's a lot. And I'm always unlearning. Unlearning is never something you finish doing.
Yes,
It's an ongoing, it's an active process.
absolutely. What about, just out of curiosity, your the times that you work per day, have you changed that at all? Do you still follow kind of a 9 to 5 or a different schedule?
I do not follow a 9 to 5 at all. I work in clumps. And I have clumps that are work time, clumps that are rest time, and clumps that are where I do my personal spiritual work and take my Hebrew priestess classes. And I have usually two of those lumps per day. So two things that I'm doing in two of those categories per day.
Dang, that's smart.
And I have like a few different areas of my day. And with my chronic illness, I have very specific times of day that I am just not available. Before noon, I'm not available. I'm dealing with my narcolepsy. I'm dealing with my GI issues. I am just like, I'm dealing with my health from when I wake up until at least noon.
Mm,
So I can't schedule anything in that time.
so relatable. I'm the same. I don't like to work before noon either. Um, Someone asked in the chat, do you mind repeating what you said about working in clumps?
Yes, so I will chunk my time out. So, for example, I will say I can take so many clients between 2 and 5, and that is work time for that day. And between 12 and 2 is spiritual time. And I tend to have clumps of between 12 and 2, 2 to 4:30 or 5, and then from 6:30 to 8:30. Those are my personal clumps, my personal times that I am more likely to be reliable.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm autistic. I still like schedule. I like routine. So I try to rotate. Mondays are actually a full disability day for me. That's another long story. But for Tuesdays, I have a big work clump and then a big spiritual clump. On Wednesdays, I have the opposite. I have a spiritual clump and then a work clump. On Thursdays, I have a small work clump, big spiritual clump. So sometimes they're different sizes. Part of how I decide is based on when my clients need their times. And some of them is based around what time my classes are.
Mm.
And then it's the opposite. Sometimes I'm figuring out what clients I can take on because of what times I have available. Sometimes I'm figuring out what classes I can take based on what times I have available. So it's a bit of, both playing a little seesaw to balance.
Little Tetris. I get you.
Yeah, it's a lot. Tetris is better. It is Tetris. It is absolutely Tetris.
Oh my gosh. I'm glad you shared that because I do like order and routine, but when it comes to like work, um, I tend to operate in a perpetual state of overwhelm. I wake up in the morning and I'm like, here's all the things I have to do. Let me throw them in the air and see where it lands and let's hope for the best. So I like this idea of clumps because that kind of order could really help me. Thank you for sharing that. For those listening who aren't like actively here, I have since 2014, I've been doing my real estate photography business. That's what I did after I burned out. But now I also have Soft. I have my own spiritual practice too. Like I need to shower. I hate showering. So it would be nice to just make a shower clump. I should do this. I like this.
Honestly, showering is a clump for me.
Yeah.
Showering is its own clump, and especially if it's a hair wash day.
Oh,
A hair wash day, there's only allowed to be another small clump on that day because if it's a hair wash day, that's taking most of my energy.
yes. Oh my
It
gosh.
just is.
Agreed.
It just is.
Yeah. Oh my
That was yesterday, right?
God.
Like,
Swad asks in the chat, do you have a way to measure time? And also, how do you decide? And do you know ahead of time, which I think you might have answered. So can you comment if that wasn't answered, Swad? But the second question is, do you have a way to measure the time?
Yeah, I think I'm just the clumps thing was very curious to me, and I like the idea of it. I was just wondering, especially because you take clients, I'm sure it's sometimes you have to figure out ahead of time. Like that's what I struggle with is like as soon as it's not now, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing like tomorrow at 4 p.m. So yeah, I was wondering how you like figure that out or if you just leave huge gaps. I don't know, just whatever helps.
some of it is I do leave huge gaps. It's important for me to have gaps in between each clump that I've scheduled, because
Okay.
there needs to be transition time, there needs to be rest time, and there needs to be time of if my plan needs to change, figuring that out. Um, I schedule in little bits of motivation building sometimes, and I lean into the hyper focus. So if I have a work clump coming up, I will think about what is something I'm working on in that with this client that falls somewhere in my special interest. Well, autism is my special interest, so there's gonna be something. And I start thinking about what is something I can bring up today to help this client, and then just let myself go on a journey. I always make sure that I have at least 30 minutes of nonverbal time before I go into my work. And so I'm either dissociating or intentionally ramping myself up, depending on how much I feel ready for work or not. If I feel like, yeah, I'm looking forward to working today, then I dissociate. If I feel like I know I can do it once I get there, but I'm in so much anxiety, I dissociate. If I feel like, oh, I do not want to do this today, I don't know how I'm going to mentally get myself to want to do this, I lean into the hyper focus and use that to build up my momentum. Does that answer?
Okay, yeah, another granular question, I promise, is that because I'm trying to put a picture together, but when you were like hyper focusing, because I think connecting it back to yourself and something you're interested in keeps your mind occupied. That's really fucking smart. And I was wondering, like, if when you're doing that, like, it does keep you occupied, but what, like, if the say the conversation goes a different direction and like your special interest is not touched, like, how do you maintain? I mean, other than the fact that you're professional, I assume, but like, how do you, let's like, if we're being real, it's like, how do you still like not get like like preemptively bored because maybe you won't touch, like, you know, if you never get that reward. Because I like, yeah, distracting yourself has worked for me. I'm trying to figure out how to actually get the reward and to get myself to keep coming back. So that's kind of what I was wondering.
Oh, that's a great question.
If you have any, that's actually super chill, because same too.
I will admit most of the time it comes up. Um,
Okay. Period.
because I'll look specifically at what my clients have talked about the last couple of weeks. I'll look at their journals, um, or things that they bring up often. But if it doesn't, a lot of the time they're going to bring up something that still fits in my special interest. Another thing I do is I find it extremely helpful to have some place I can externally process while listening. So I have this big old book. And in this book, I will doodle about absolutely everything and anything. Sometimes if a client is talking and I'm not actively note taking, I'm drawing in this book so that my body's doing something to help keep my mind present. And sometimes I can then go back and look at the art and reflect on, was there stuff happening for me that I need to give more time that I couldn't give time to in that moment? And they can be super random. So here's an example of a sketch that I've done during many sessions.
Ooh.
And so they're
Like really serious. I thought you were doodle like circling. That's such a
yeah, well, this is doodling if you look close. You know, I do it's over a lot of period of time, and I just go in and do these mindless patterns.
That's
It's
so
called Zen table, and
wow.
it keeps, it gives my mind, if it needs another line, another thing to process while I can be intentional in listening. Um, and sometimes my clients ask me what I'm drawing and I show them and we talk about it and we have it jumps off into another conversation. Sometimes I'll encourage clients to do the same. A lot of the time, actually, I'll encourage clients to, even if it's just like moving your pen around. Sometimes I have ones that are like that too. This one will look funny. So this one started like that, and then I went over it in other colors. You can see there's a bunch of Hebrew letters.
Wow.
Those are what the letters that stood out to me when I went back and looked at this and reflected in my own time after being in a session, whereas the rest of the lines came through while I was working with someone.
Amazing. Wow. Um, would you mind terribly if I answered that question too, Swad? Because yeah, I mean, you did kind of sum it up there. You basically generally like what you do, but there's a thing that
yeah, like helps you get momentum to start. So it's like something else pulls you in. Like that makes sense because like you like what you do. So just making sure that you actually like what you do for the most part to maintain that. I think that feels okay. I'm like, cool, good to know. But yeah, go ahead, Brittany.
okay, so um I my special interest is houses and interiors, but not all of them, obviously. Like I really like pretty houses or ones where I personally feel inspired, and I get to see a lot of those. But sometimes I just see a basic ass house, or sometimes I have to shoot a house where people are moving around and there's a lot of chaos, and I don't get to really hyper focus, which is my preference. So for that, I go into what I call robot mode, which really just might be dissociating. But I have a baseline. And I think that's the thing. Like when you're self-employed, whatever product you're offering or service, I think it's good to create a baseline so that if it's not enjoyable, you just go into robot mode and you do the thing that has to be done. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what
Can you can you define like baseline? Like are
so
you I assume you mean like like you like or something like that,
yeah,
right?
so my baseline is that like I already go into every shoot, not before I know if I'm going to love it or not. I know in general, I want to take about 35 photos. I know the order I'm going to go in. I like to start in this room, then move this space in this order. So if I don't get to fully delve into what I'm doing, I'm just going to dissociate and stick with the robot mode and just do my baseline tasks without having to think about it too much. And if I'm able, I'll be listening to a podcast or some playlist that I really like. So I still get a little stimulation. And that's kind of how I handle it. I prefer to go in and just fall in love with the place and just get creative and be left to my own devices to do that. But that's just not always the case. And then I go into robot mode, as I call it. Yeah, pre-planned steps so you can go straight to flow state. Exactly. That's exactly. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, so that means that, like anything you're learning that's new, making sure that that's enjoyable, but if you don't like it, making sure that you're not having to opt in mentally.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that. That's really smart.
I guess it wouldn't be the same for you, Jayce. You still have to opt in mentally, but I do.
Yes, I cannot dissociate when I'm with a client. That's definitely not really an option for
Sounds
me.
fun.
If I feel I am in that place, I just reschedule a session. I
Okay.
say, hey, this is what I'm having a flare up. I want to give you my full attention. Can we reschedule for later this week?
That's so.
And that's important too, of like making space for yourself. I have trouble doing that sometimes. I really struggle to say message a client. At least I did at first. I'm better at it now. Of I have to reschedule, especially when it's less than 24 hours, which for me it always is because it's about a flare up.
Mm.
Um, and I have literally never had a client respond poorly. Every single it ranges from, all right, no problem, to thank you so much for doing this. Seeing you model this really helps me know that I can do it too.
Yeah.
And that has made it a lot easier for me to take that step for myself. And I have to just remind myself that like anyone who's going to respond poorly isn't really meant. That's not someone whose opinion I really care about.
Yeah. Even hearing you say that helps my brain. Wow. We gotta have more podcast episodes.
Right? There's time.
This is good. I actually just have one more question for you. And I really am curious about your spirituality and what you think might help other people who are like neurodivergent, who are trying to get better at trusting their intuition. How can they begin to trust it more or cultivate it if they're right at the beginning of the journey?
I love that. Play with it. Play with it. Practice. Have fun with it.
Mm.
It is okay to be playful with spirit, with source. It is okay, more than okay. In fact, the only way to really develop a relationship with any divination tool is to use it as a conversation tool with yourself. These divination tools, they don't tell us the future. They are a they're a tool. They are something that helps spirit communicate with us in some way and help get that message across. Um, but that doesn't mean they're the end all be all. And it doesn't mean we always totally understand what the message is. When I use tarot cards, oracle cards, anything with words, all the words on that card might not apply to that particular pull. I am feeling some sense of pull towards particular words, and that matters. Something that my spiritual mentor had me do is intuition tests of, and this practice doesn't work for everyone. So if it feels like, that would make me feel like scared, don't do it. But, I would pull a card, have it face down, and then I would pull other cards and have that conversation asking to describe what the card that was down was. And
Mhm.
I would write down every single thought that came to my head, every single thing. And then I'd look. And the things that I most questioned were the ones that were actually right. And
Wow.
so that's part of how I started to feel, okay, those were things I heard in this particular part of my body in this particular way. That is where I hear my intuition
Mm.
and play more, again, doing exercises like that to, like everything else is practice. And so to strengthen that muscle, allowing divination tools to be something that you have an ongoing relationship with and continue to build. Um, a lot of us neurodivergent folks are intuitive, and a lot of us have heard those the telepathy tapes,
Mm-hmm. And really,
and they're
mm-hmm.
and they tell us a lot. And every single thing I heard made complete sense to me with everything I know, with everything I've experienced, with everything I've seen in other autistics that have a telepathic power that I do not. Um, Not long after we listened to those tapes, we discovered my partner has that power when he started just shoving things into my thoughts into my brain. And I was like, bro, what is happening? It was, oh, that was doing that. So then we had to, make some new boundaries. Boundaries around your spiritual work and spiritual energy is really important too. Making sure you find ways that you are spiritually protecting yourself and protecting those around you. Energy can be really strong.
Mm-hmm.
And so making sure you have the right protections in place can be really important too.
I love that. Oh, we should. Okay. We're coming up on an hour, so I want to start closing out, especially because I want to leave room for people's questions. But we're gonna have to have a
Sure.
conversation because there's so much more that I'd love to go deeper about. But and also before I open this up to questions, I want to say, well, two things. One, Jayce is going to start hosting an event on the 24/7 Zoom called Ask the Cards. And so I'll let you explain that in a moment, but I just, for anyone who's listening and for those who are here, I will post, well, if you're in the app, you know how to find the calendar, the event calendar. Check the event calendar for updates on Ask the Cards. I think we're thinking about doing it like every 2 weeks. Is that the case?
Yeah.
Excellence, excellence. And so I would love it if you want to talk more about it, please do. But could you also let us know where to find you and if you're accepting clients and how they would find you as well?
Absolutely. Um, so well, to start with that, read the cards. It's going to be an open hour. Some of y'all have stopped in when I'm doing some tarot readings on here. People can come in, ask a question to the cards. They can also ask questions generally about spirituality or spiritual counseling, um, and get a couple readings in, and just a general time to check in with spirit and see if any messages are coming your way. In terms of contacting me, I am taking clients, but my list is pretty limited right now. I have a bit of a wait list. I have one or two spots that might become available soon. My practice partner, who I highly, highly recommend, also my mentor, absolutely amazing, definitely is taking new clients right now. I am taking more spiritual counseling clients right now than strictly mental health. If you're interested in combination, I'm also taking. And I can be found at undertherainbowcollective.com. That's the website. I also can be found on TikTok as the Jewitchy Healer or Jayce the Jewitch. Um, and there was another question that I'm not remembering.
Oh, I think that was it. Are you accepting new clients?
Okay.
Find you. Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh God. I'm telling you, there's so many things, but Earlier you had mentioned that from licensure, and I wanted to know what that means. And does it happen to mean that you can take clients in other states? Is that a thing?
Hmm.
Excellent.
Great question. Yes, I take clients all over, including internationally, as does my practice partner. We actively divest from licensure as a form of active protest for a lot of the issues in the mental health system in the United States, as well as an act of decolonizing our practice.
Mhm.
Um, there are a lot, there's a lot of gatekeeping, um, ethics that aren't really ethical, low standard of ethics, that our current mental health system pays a lot of money to not maintain,
Mm.
or requires a lot of money to not maintain, and that requires the money from the individuals doing the actual work. And that is one of the many things that can keep a lot of marginalized folks from being able to access the field, as does certain aspects of some of the education. There are a lot of problems in the current education system in higher ed, uh, in many areas, and mental health being a big one. So we actively divest from that licensure. We have our own ethical practices to stay, up to date in keeping ourselves responsible. We all have peer supervision, which once you're licensed, usually you stop supervision. We do not do that. We continue peer supervision. Um, we continue education, both in formal, uh, both in keeping up with formal higher ed, but also making sure we keep up with what communities and what is really standards that are coming out for each community, and listening to them. It's just not that hard.
No, it shouldn't be.
And yeah, and so part of that is we can see people all over. It help, limiting folks to that one state that they continuously pay for is one of the ways that mental health counselors, or the mental health system really gatekeeps healers being able to access those needing the healing. Um, we are not able to take insurance because we divest from licensure, but because of that, we do sliding scale and have a mutual aid program that helps cover sessions when folks are struggling financially. Because when you're struggling financially is not when you want to have your therapy cut off.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's so true.
Yeah.
Mm, I love that.
So
Okay,
that's
so that's good. For those listening, no matter where you are, you can still reach out. It sounds like you have limited spots available, but you do have a partner and your mentor who has some spaces. So I will,
yes.
on YouTube, if you're watching this, just check the description box and I'll put all of your information down there. And in the soft app, it will be, where will we put it? Oh, it'll just be under the video. Right. It'll be under the video in the app.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
And
makes sense.
absolutely. Well, thank you so, so much. I want to, there's a question here from Gigi, and it's back to when we were talking about spirituality. And Gigi asks, I'm curious, what are some of the ways that you set spiritual boundaries?
Oh, there are so many. I know you love crystals. I love crystals for that too, especially certain ones. I had on my little altar here. Well, let's see if my computer will let me do this. So my little altar here, I have two crystals that I keep on my altar that help hold the boundary for me for all spiritual space. Um, I regular energy cleansings. Do I burn herbs that are cleansing that are particular to my culture, which is Judaism and Jewish witchery. Um I There are also a lot of visualization techniques that I highly recommend. The most common one being visualizing armor around yourself that is made of a metal that spiritual energy cannot get through. Um, a lot of time you can also protect the top of your head. That can be a way with a hat. There's a reason a lot of cultures have head coverings, or even just a bun. There's a reason I cut off all this hair but leave it up top here.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, there's a lot of different ways. Personally, I love using the moon cycles to charge my crystals as well as cleanse them. I also will do, um, again, that herb cleansing for my crystals as well as myself, my energy, my space. Um, there's a lot. There are also little protection amulets around my home. Again, mine are specific to Jewish culture, but something that I do in a lot of the spiritual counseling work is helping people find, exploring their own ancestral background. Almost every culture has some sort of mysticism, seeing if they find any connection with that, and then also looking at open practices and seeing what feels right. Are there any deities of open practices that you feel particularly connected to? Is there religious trauma that needs to be healed before finding spirituality and being comforted by that? Um, Addressing that as well, addressing tense moments of spiritual past is an important way of also staying energetically cleansed and protected. Um, yeah.
it's fantastic. Gigi says, "Oh wow, never thought of a bun as a way to guard the crown. That's really interesting. It makes me wonder about a natural disposition to wear my hair up." Interesting. Interesting.
When I first heard about that, I had the same reaction because usually, my hair is only like this if I'm coming to something like this. Like y'all have seen me. My hair is usually up here like this, almost always. And when I first learned about this, I went, oh, I like my bun much more now
Oh,
because it's protecting. It really is. And I know nothing's getting through this hair. So
um, well, thank you so much for being here. I feel like this was such a fantastic conversation. Yeah, we can end it there. But just before we do, does anyone else have another question? Feel free to unmute if you want to talk or leave it in the chat. And I can read it out loud for you if you don't want to say it out loud. Up to you. I'll do a little dance while we wait. Okay, I think we might.
here for it. I also want to say thank you for inviting me to be here. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I have a feeling there are more to come.
Absolutely. Your brain is so freaking brilliant. Thank you for sharing it with us. And yeah, I look forward to more
Thank
conversations.
you.
Of course. Okay, I know. Oh my God, we got to talk about that one of these days. Why is that the response I always want to dart?
I know. I know.
Not today. I'm pressing end record. Thank you all for
Too
watching.
many options.